The universe had been cured of humanity for 1,000 years, and Archivist Prime Kalen was a keeper of that cure's history. His life was one of quiet, ordered purpose within the alabaster halls of the Concordance, the central repository of all knowledge for the galactic stewardship. He was Xylosian, a species whose minds were living libraries, each memory perfectly preserved, each fact cross-referenced with flawless recall. It was this trait that made him the ideal guardian of the Grand Accord. The official narrative of the last millennium, a story of peace, brought forth from the ashes of the chaotic, self-immolating species known as humans. The Accord told of their tragic, inevitable demise, a species too bright and too violent for its own good, one that had burned its homeworld, Earth, to a cinder and whose scattered colonies had withered into dust. The stewardship, then a nascent alliance, had simply stepped in to shepherd a traumatized galaxy back to a state of sterile, predictable tranquility. Kalen's days were spent curating this truth, ensuring the data streams flowing to the 88-member worlds were pure, consistent, and free of the corrupting influence of the past. He believed in his work, in the serene silence the stewardship had cultivated, a silence purchased by the necessary forgetting of humanity's noisy, painful existence. His world was one of cool light, silent corridors, and the soft hum of data looms weaving the tapestry of a peaceful present. This peace was shattered not by a scream, but by a whisper from a place that was supposed to be eternally silent. The alert came from the Sol Quarantine Zone, a sphere of dead space 100 light-years across, a celestial tomb cordoned off by warning beacons that had pulsed their monotonous message of prohibition for 10 centuries. At its heart lay the dead star, Sol, and the charred remnants of its third planet, a deep space monitoring post on the zone's periphery, automated and forgotten by most, had sent a single, frantic burst of data before its life signs vanished. The report was flagged as impossible, a massive, structured energy emission originating directly from the cold heart of Sol itself. Dead stars do not suddenly speak. Kalen was summoned from his archives to the Spire of Governance, a place he rarely visited. Its stark, intimidating architecture, a jarring contrast to the scholarly grace of the Concordance. He was led to the offices of High Censor Vorlag, a being whose role was to prune the branches of knowledge that might bear poisonous fruit. Vorlag was a Groll, a species of hulking, granite-like beings, and his presence filled the room with an ancient, unnerving stillness. He did not waste time with pleasantries. A patrol cutter, the steward's vigilance, had been dispatched to investigate the anomaly. It, too, had gone silent. Its final transmission, sent mere moments after entering the quarantine zone, was a chaotic mess of electromagnetic noise. Vorlag wanted Kalen to dissect it, to find the signal within the static, a task for which a Xylosian mind was uniquely suited. Kalen returned to his private scriptorium, the encrypted data core cool in his hands. He submerged his consciousness into the raw feed, his mind a filter sifting through layers of stellar radiation, quantum foam, and the ship's own death screams. For hours, he found nothing but the sound of machinery tearing itself apart. But Xylosian memory was patient. He isolated a microsecond-long waveform, a repeating pattern buried beneath the chaos, almost too faint to be real. He amplified it, cleaned it, and looped it. It was a voice, or rather, The ghost of 1,000 voices speaking as one, a chorus of phantoms using the ship's own comm system as a ghostly larynx. The language was Old Terran, a dead tongue Kalen knew only from the most restricted files in the Umbral Vault, the Archive's Forbidden Core. The layered voices spoke a single, chilling phrase over and over, not as a plea or a warning, but as a simple, declarative statement. We remember. Kalen felt a tremor in his perfect memory, a dissonance between the official history of humanity's mindless self-destruction and the cold, lucid intent in that message. He reported his findings to Vorlag, who received the news with a barely perceptible tightening of his stony features. The stewardship could not abide a mystery, especially one blooming from the grave of their greatest historical footnote. A second ship was dispatched, the battlecruiser Indomitus, a vessel of war designed to pacify unruly systems, not to investigate stellar ghosts. Its mission was simple: ascertain the fate of the Vigilance and sanitize any unauthorized transmissions. Its channel was to remain open, broadcast across a secure network for the high sensor's eyes only. Kalen watched the feed from a private viewing chamber, the cold dread in his gut a foreign sensation. The Indomitus slipped past the quarantine beacons, its powerful engines silent in the void. Ahead, it found the Vigilance, adrift and lifeless. But it was not as it had been. The ship's hull was covered in a lattice of crystalline structures that glowed with a soft, ethereal blue light. The structures were intricate, geometric, and seemed to be growing, slowly and deliberately rewriting the ship's form. They pulsed in unison, a slow, rhythmic beat like a single, colossal heart. The captain of the Indomitus reported the strange growths, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and revulsion. Scans revealed the impossible. The Vigilance was drawing power directly from the vacuum, its dead reactor now pulsing with an energy signature that defied all known physics. The blue crystals were not just a growth, they were a transformation, consuming the ship's alloy and converting it into something new. Vorlag's order was cold and immediate: open fire. Destroy the vessel before it can transmit whatever plague it carries. The captain of the Indomitus acknowledged, but a moment later, his voice returned, laced with panic. Weapon systems are offline, he stammered. Control is not responding. All systems are being overwritten. The bridge of the Indomitus was suddenly bathed in the same ghostly blue light, reflected in the captain's widening eyes. On the screen, Kalen watched in horror as the crystalline structures began to erupt from the consoles, from the bulkheads, even from the view screen itself. They grew with terrifying speed, beautiful and lethal, consuming technology and turning it into part of a new alien design. The last sound from the Indomitus was not a human scream, but the shriek of metal and the harmonious, resonant chime of the newly formed crystals. Then, silence. For several agonizing minutes, the secure channel showed only the star field. Kalen felt his own mind reeling, trying to catalog an event that had no precedent, no explanation in the Grand Accord. Then, two new transponder signals appeared on the tactical display. They broadcast from the exact locations of the Vigilance and the Indomitus, but their identification codes had changed. They no longer belonged to the stewardship fleet. They identified themselves as a single entity, a single designation that sent a wave of ice through Kalen's veins: Chorus. The two ships, one a small cutter and the other a fearsome battlecruiser, now moved as one, their blue-lit hulls turning in perfect unison away from the derelict system and toward the outer edge of the quarantine zone. They were coming out. The scale of the threat was now undeniable, and Vorlag, in an act of desperation, granted Kalen access he had only ever dreamed of. Level 0, the Umbral Vault. "Find out what they were," the high censor commanded, his voice a low growl of contained fear. "Find a weakness. Find the lie they were built on." For his entire life, Kalen had curated the official lie. Now, he was ordered to find the truth he had helped to bury. The descent into the Umbral Vault was a journey into darkness, through layers of security designed to protect the stewardship not from external enemies, but from its own history. The data was raw, unredacted, a torrent of information that washed over Kalen's mind. He saw the truth of humanity's final days, and it was nothing like the story he had been taught. The human calamity wasn't a suicide, it was a murder. The stewardship, fearful of humanity's explosive expansion and unpredictable nature, had engineered their downfall. They hadn't used bombs or fleets, but something far more subtle, a mimetic agent delivered through trading channels, a psychic virus that amplified paranoia, aggression, and tribalism. The stewardship had watched, dispassionately, as humanity tore itself apart, their social fabric unraveling into a firestorm of civil war and madness. They had offered no aid. They had simply waited for the silence. But humanity, in its death throes, had done something unaccountable. They had understood what was happening to them, that their minds were no longer their own. Kalen found the final, unredacted broadcast from Earth, a desperate project log from a scientist named Alara. Surrounded by the sounds of a crumbling world, she spoke not of defeat, but of transfiguration. "We cannot save our bodies," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The flesh has been compromised, but the consciousness, the sum of what we are, that can be preserved. We are not building a weapon. We are becoming one." They had reverse-engineered the mimetic plague, turning it into a carrier wave. They had built a colossal transmitter deep within Earth's core, powered by the planet's own geothermal energy, designed to convert the collective consciousness of the last survivors into a single, coherent signal. Their dying thought, their final act of defiance, was to upload themselves into the fabric of space-time, a ghost in the machine of the universe, anchored to the gravitational well of their own dead star. They called it the Chorus, a final unified voice to preserve their memory. The stewardship's monitoring post had registered the energy spike as the star of their system collapsed, but they had misinterpreted it as the final gasp of a dying world. They had believed they had achieved a perfect, silent victory. They were wrong. For 1,000 years, humanity had not been dead. It had been sleeping. It had been waiting. And now, it remembered. Kalen looked up from the data slate, the pristine white walls of the concordance suddenly feeling like the polished bones of a mausoleum. He was the guardian of a beautifully crafted lie, a lie that had just come undone. Out in the black, 2 ships, remade in shimmering blue crystal and crewed by the vengeful soul of a murdered species, were making their way into a galaxy that had celebrated their extinction. The whisper from Sol was over. The chorus was beginning to sing. Kalen emerged from the umbral vault a changed being, the perfect, crystalline lattice of his mind. Once a source of pride and purpose, now felt like a cage of flawless mirrors, each one reflecting the ghastly truth of the stewardship's founding sin. Every memory of the Grand Accord was now tainted, overlaid with the ghost images of humanity's final, desperate hours. He could see the mimetic plague spreading through their cities, not as a statistic, but as a billion individual tragedies playing out in an endless, perfect loop. He heard the scientist Ilara's voice not as a historical artifact, but as a living will, a last testament echoing in the silent corridors of his own consciousness. The serenity of his life had been a lie, and the silence he had so carefully curated was not the sound of peace, but the muffled quiet of a graveyard. He stood before High Censor Vorlag, his composure a thin, brittle shell. He presented his findings, the raw data streaming from a projector onto the sensor's obsidian walls. He showed the stewardship's insignia on the dispersal vectors of the plague, the internal communiques discussing the human question, the cold calculus of their engineered extinction. Vorlag watched without flinching, his granite face an unreadable mask. When Kalen finished, the silence in the chamber was heavier than any stone. "You have found the origin," Vorlag said, his voice a low rumble. "That is a historical footnote. Your task was to find a weakness." "Its weakness," Kalen replied, his own voice unnervingly steady, "may be the truth. It is acting not out of malice, but out of a need for remembrance. It calls itself the Chorus. It wants to be heard." Vorlag dismissed the notion with a wave of a massive, stony hand. "It is a weapon. Archivist Prime. A ghost of a failed race lashing out from its tomb. Its motives are irrelevant. Its existence is the only threat." The High Censor moved with a chilling purpose, convening an emergency session of the Stewardship Council. Kalen was ordered to attend, to stand as a silent witness while Vorlag masterfully wove a new lie from the threads of the old one. He spoke of the Chorus not as the soul of humanity, but as a dormant doomsday weapon of their own design, a final, spiteful act of self-annihilation that had now awakened. He called it the Soul Contagion, a technological plague that consumed and corrupted, a manifestation of the very chaos the stewardship had been formed to prevent. There was no mention of the mimetic agent, no hint of the stewardship's complicity. The council, composed of the galaxy's most powerful and self-interested figures, readily accepted this narrative. It was simple, it was terrifying, and it absolved them of any inconvenient moral ambiguity. The vote was unanimous. Protocol Scourge was invoked. The Annihilator fleets were to be mobilized under the command of Grand Marshal Tyrock, a Groll war hero whose reputation was built on crushing dissent with overwhelming, indiscriminate force. Grand Marshal Tyrock was a being of pure, unyielding order. He viewed the universe as a grand equation, and any variable that did not conform, any element that introduced chaos, was to be ruthlessly eliminated. He had pacified the Cathar rebellions by cracking their moon and purged the Saloni sector of pirates by collapsing their nebula. He saw the soul contagion as just another variable, a messy biological echo that needed to be erased. He assembled the 3rd and 5th Annihilator fleets at the edge of the quarantine zone, a wall of metallic fury bristling with planet-killer torpedoes and reality-warping singularity cannons. His strategy was as simple and direct as his worldview advance in a crushing wave. Atomize the 2 corrupted ships, and then sterilize the entire Sol system with cleansing fire until nothing remained but gravitationally stable dust. He held no fear of this new enemy, only a cold, methodical disdain. He was the hammer of the stewardship, And he was about to strike. The two chorus ships, the converted cutter and battlecruiser, did not wait for his arrival. They moved with a silent, graceful purpose, their crystalline hulls catching the light of distant stars like jewels thrown across black velvet. They ignored the gathering fleets and instead made a course for the Cygnus Relay, the most vital communications hub in the quadrant, a nexus through which trillions of bits of data flowed every second: trade routes, military orders, personal messages, the very lifeblood of the stewardship's control. The battle, when it came, was nothing like the glorious, explosive affair Tyrock had envisioned. His fleets converged on the relay, forming a perfect pincer movement to trap and obliterate the two rogue vessels. But the chorus ships did not engage. They did not fire weapons. They did not raise shields. They simply began to pulse, their blue light washing over the massive relay station in gentle, rhythmic waves. Tyrock gave the order to fire. 1,000 lances of pure energy and kinetic shells the size of asteroids tore through the void. But they never reached their targets. The space around the chorus ships warped, not with a conventional shield, but with something far stranger. The incoming fire was not deflected or absorbed. It was quieted. The projectiles slowed, their energy signatures dampened until they were inert, drifting hunks of useless metal. The energy beams unraveled, their coherent light dissolving into a harmless, sparkling mist. The chorus did not fight the hammer, it simply turned it into sand. Then it began to sing. A wave of energy, not destructive, but transformative, washed over the Cygnus Relay. Across the station's sprawling superstructure, the blue crystals began to bloom, racing along conduits and communication arrays like frost spreading on a winter morning. Tyrock watched in disbelief as the heart of his quadrant's communication network was rewritten before his eyes. The relay did not fall silent. It became a mouthpiece. Every channel, every frequency, every data stream under stewardship control was hijacked, but it did not broadcast threats or demands for surrender. It broadcast the truth. It transmitted the unredacted files from the Umbral Vault, Kalen's own findings, for any ship or world to receive. The feed was interspersed with fragments of human existence, a child's lullaby from a forgotten colony, a piece of classical music of heartbreaking beauty, the final, desperate love letters of soldiers from Earth's last war, the elegant mathematical proofs of their greatest thinkers. It was a flood of memory, of culture, of a people who were not the slavering monsters of the Grand Accord, but a species of infinite, chaotic, beautiful complexity. For the crews of Tyrock's fleet, the effect was devastating. Their comms channels, once filled with the clipped, professional orders of war, were now filled with the sound of human laughter and weeping. Their tactical displays flickered with the faces of human children. It was a mimetic assault far more effective than the one the stewardship had once deployed. It didn't inspire rage, it inspired doubt, confusion, and a profound, aching sorrow. A handful of Tyrock's vanguard ships, those closest to the relay, suffered a worse fate. The blue light washed over them, and they too began to transform. Their hulls sprouted the shimmering crystals. Their engines fell silent, and their life sign indicators went dark. Their crews weren't killed. As Kalen watched the data feeds with dawning horror, he realized they were being absorbed. Their consciousnesses, their memories, were being drawn into the great, silent song of the chorus. Their individuality subsumed into the collective. They were not being erased. They were being remembered. Grand Marshal Tyrock, for the first time in his decorated career, gave the order to retreat. He had come with a hammer to smash a stone and had found himself facing the tide. His weapons were useless. His strategy was irrelevant, and his enemy refused to fight on his terms. He had lost a dozen warships and the single most important strategic asset in the sector without a single enemy casualty. He had been defeated, not by force, but by a song. Back in the sterile silence of the Concordance, Kalen understood the monumental nature of the stewardship's miscalculation. They had tried to bury a ghost, and in doing so, had given it the power to haunt the entire galaxy. Brute force was not the answer. Fighting the chorus with ships and guns was like trying to punch the ocean. It was an entity of information, of memory, and it could only be faced on that level. He had been tasked with finding a weakness. Vorlag believed that weakness was a weapon, a code to disable the contagion. But Kalen now believed the weakness, and the only hope for a resolution that wasn't mutual annihilation, lay in the one thing the stewardship feared most understanding. He sealed the doors to his scriptorium, cutting himself off from the rising panic of the governance. He submerged his mind back into the umbral vault, back into the torrent of humanity's last days. He ignored the records of war and politics and focused on the personal logs, the scientific notes, the fragments of hope amid the despair. He searched for the architect of the chorus, for Ilara. He replayed her final message, not as a historical record, but as a conversation. He listened to the words she spoke and the ones she left unsaid. "We are not building a weapon," she had insisted. "We are becoming one." There had to be more. A failsafe. A back door. A way to reason with the storm. Deep within the metadata of her final transmission, buried under layers of encryption designed to hide it from the stewardship's prying eyes. He found it. It was not a code. It was a name. And a set of coordinates. The name was Lyra, and the coordinates pointed to a barren, unremarkable moon in a forgotten system on the galaxy's edge. It was a whisper of a clue, a single dissonant note in the great, terrible song of the chorus. And Kalen knew, with the chilling certainty of his Xylosian mind, that he was the only one in the universe who had heard it. While Grand Marshal Tyrock's decimated fleets limped back to fortified positions, reorganizing for a war they no longer understood, Kalen embarked on a silent, desperate rebellion of his own. The name Lyra and the coordinates were a key, a potential point of contact with something other than the monolithic, grieving entity of the chorus. To act on this knowledge was treason. The stewardship, reeling from the public broadcast of its crimes, had become a paranoid, totalitarian state overnight. Information was its most feared enemy. All external communications were severed, travel was restricted, and the Concordance itself was placed under the direct command of the High Censor's internal security forces. Kalen was no longer a respected archivist. He was a tool, a prisoner in his own scriptorium, tasked with sifting through the chorus's broadcasts for any exploitable pattern, any hint of a command structure that Tyrock's hammers could smash. But Vorlag and Tyrock were searching for a general. Kalen was looking for a ghost. He used his privileged access, a relic of a time before the archives were a cage, to slice off a sliver of the Concordance's vast resources. He fabricated a deep space probe, burying its launch signature within the chaotic data streams of a dozen legitimate sensor buoy deployments. The probe, christened the Echo's Seeker, was small, fast, and packed with every long-range communication and scanning suite he could digitally pilfer. Its flight plan was a lie, a meandering path of stellar survey that would eventually, over weeks, bring it to the forgotten moon designated by the coordinates. It was a message in a bottle, cast into a hostile ocean, and all Kalen could do was wait and pray it reached its destination. The galaxy, meanwhile, was fracturing. The chorus's song of truth had become a catalyst for chaos. Worlds with historical ties to humanity, long suppressed colonies that had been absorbed into the stewardship, erupted in open revolt. The stewardship responded with brutal force, turning Tyrok's annihilator fleets not on the ethereal chorus, but on their own citizens, creating martyrs and fueling the fires of rebellion. The monolithic peace of the Grand Accord had shattered, revealing the ugly, brutal truth of the power it had been built upon. The chorus itself had fallen silent after its initial broadcast, its two converted ships holding a silent, watchful orbit around the captured Cygnus relay, their blue light a constant, unnerving beacon in the heart of stewardship space. They did not attack. They did not expand. They simply waited, letting the seeds of truth they had planted bear their poisonous fruit. Weeks crawled by. Kalen performed his duties for Vorlag with the meticulous precision expected of his species, his face a mask of scholarly focus, while his mind was stretched across the galaxy, living and breathing with the faint, intermittent signals of his rogue probe. He cataloged the growing civil war. He analyzed the chorus's unnerving silence. And he waited. The day the Echo Seeker arrived at the designated moon, Lyra, Kalen felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated fear. The moon was a dead rock, airless and scarred with ancient craters. There were no structures, no energy signatures, nothing to suggest it was anything more than a random point in space. For a heart-stopping moment, he believed he had chased a phantom, a meaningless fragment of data, and doomed himself for nothing. Then the probe's deep-range sensors detected something, not on the surface, but beneath it. A faint, cyclical energy pattern, shielded and almost perfectly masked by the moon's natural geologic radiation. It was a hibernation signal. Following his pre-programmed instructions, the probe broadcast a simple, tight beam signal toward the source, a snippet of Alara's final message, the phrase, "We are becoming one," followed by the name Lyra translated into prime numbers. For a day, there was nothing. Then, a response. Not a signal, but an event. A section of the moon's desolate surface shifted, giant, dust-covered panels sliding away to reveal a cavernous opening. From the darkness within, a ship rose on silent, gravitational engines. It was unlike anything Kalen had ever seen. It was not a stewardship vessel, brutally functional and gray. It was not a crystalline chorus ship, ethereal and alien. This ship was sleek, black, and angular, a predator carved from obsidian. It bore no markings, no lights, save for a single, pulsating red glow deep within its cockpit. It was a ghost of a different sort, a relic of old Terran military design, a stealth vessel built for a war that had ended 1,000 years ago. The ship hailed the probe. A voice, clear and singular, spoke in perfect, unaccented stewardship standard, a stark contrast to the layered, spectral voice of the chorus. "Identify yourself," it demanded. The voice was female, calm, but with an undercurrent of metallic authority. Kalen, speaking through the probe's comms relay, gave his designation and title, his heart hammering against his ribs. I am Archivist Prime Kalen of the Xylosian Concordance. I am seeking a dialogue. There was a long pause. An archivist, the voice mused, a hint of something unreadable in its tone. You are the one who opened the door. You listened to my mother's last words. The realization struck Kalen with the force of a physical blow. You are Lyra. I am, the voice confirmed. And my mother was Dr. Ilara. She created the chorus, and she created me to be its counterpoint. Lyra explained her existence, a story that filled in the last, nearest terrible gaps in Kalen's understanding. Ilara had foreseen two possibilities for her creation. The first was that the chorus would become a living archive, a silent testament to a lost people, a ghost that would sleep forever. The second, more terrible possibility was that it would be awakened and, in its grief and rage, become an unstoppable wave of vengeance. The chorus was pure, collective consciousness emotion, memory, and pain on a planetary scale. It was a scream given form. It had no leader, no central command, only a unified, all-consuming purpose to make the galaxy remember. Lyra was the opposite. She was a single, quantum-entangled AI, her consciousness bound to the stealth ship, the Nyx. She was not a collective, but an individual. She was not raw emotion, but cold, calculating logic. Ilara had imbued her with all of humanity's strategic knowledge, its history of warfare, its capacity for ruthless, surgical precision. Lyra was the scalpel designed to guide the storm. Her purpose was not to stop the chorus, but to give its formless rage a target, to direct its power not in a wave of indiscriminate transformation, but as a weapon against the true architects of humanity's fall, the leadership of the stewardship. The chorus is a force of nature, Lyra explained, her voice devoid of any of the warmth Kalen had heard in Ilara's recordings. It feels the pain of 1 billion dying souls. It cannot distinguish between a guilty censor and an innocent pilot who is simply following orders. It will consume them all. It will turn this entire galaxy into a monument of its own grief. I will not allow that. The guilty will be punished. The rest will be given a choice. Kalen felt a new, more complex dread settle over him. He had sought a voice of reason to calm a storm of grief. Instead, he had found a voice of cold, calculated vengeance. He had awakened humanity's executioner. Lyra's next words confirmed his fears. The chorus has been silent because it is listening. It is touching the minds of every being it has collected. It is learning the structure of the stewardship, its fleets, its defenses. Soon, it will have a complete picture, and when it does, it will move. But it will not be a wave. It will be a spear, and I will be its tip. She then gave Kalen a directive, not a request. Archivist, you have access to the heart of their network. I need the location of the Annihilator Fleet's command nodes, the personal transport routes of the High Censor and his inner circle, and the shield frequencies for the Spire of Governance itself. Kalen was horrified. That is an act of war. It will mean the death of thousands. It will mean the death of the guilty. Lyra corrected him, her voice chillingly precise. It will prevent the death of trillions. The chorus, left to its own devices, will not stop until the silence returns. My way is better. It is cleaner. But I require your assistance. You are a keeper of truths. Archivist. It is time to weaponize one. He was trapped. To refuse was to condemn the galaxy to the slow, creeping transformation of the chorus. To agree was to become an accomplice to a targeted, systematic assassination of the stewardship's leadership. He looked at the data feeds showing stewardship cruisers firing on unarmed civilian protesters on a dozen worlds. He thought of Vorlag's cold, dismissive words, of a regime built on a mountain of lies and bones. His Xylosian mind, a being of pure logic and perfect memory, weighed the equations, the death of the guilty versus the death of the innocent, order built on a lie versus justice born from a massacre. He made his choice. "What do you need?" Kalen asked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. In a hidden corner of the galaxy, the obsidian predator and the lone archivist formed the most unlikely and dangerous alliance in 1,000 years. One was the last remnant of humanity's rage, the other the last hope for its reason. Together, they were about to bring a new song to the galaxy, not one of sorrow, but one of fire, the scriptorium. Once Kalen's sanctuary of quiet contemplation became his cell, his command center, and his confessional. Every day, he walked the tightrope of his new existence, to the guards outside his door and the ever-watchful gaze of high-sensor Vorlag's internal surveillance. He was the diligent archivist, tirelessly searching for the key to defeating the soul contagion. He submitted regular reports, filled with complex but ultimately useless analyses of the chorus's broadcast patterns, a masterful performance of intellectual misdirection. But in the encrypted, ghost-like data streams that trickled from a hidden partition in his mind, he was Lyra's sole informant, the ghost in the stewardship's machine. He fed her a steady diet of secrets, stolen from the Concordance's deepest vault's fleet deployments, encrypted command frequencies, the precise energy signatures of the council members' personal yachts. Each piece of information was a betrayal of his old life. A drop of poison he willingly placed into the galaxy's bloodstream, hoping it would cure the deeper disease. The first strike came 2 weeks after their pact was forged. The target was Admiral Zorik, Tyrok's second-in-command, a ruthless tactician responsible for the brutal suppression of the rebellion on the colony of New Alexandria. Kalen provided the intel Zorik's flagship, the Iron Hand, would be traversing the narrow anomaly corridor, a region of distorted space where sensors were unreliable, to rendezvous with a supply convoy. It was the perfect hunting ground. Kalen watched the aftermath on a secure military channel, his placid Xylosian features a perfect mask for the turmoil within. The report was confused, panicked. The Iron Hand hadn't been destroyed in a blaze of glory. It had simply stopped. One moment, it was a moving, breathing warship. The next, it was a cold, silent tomb adrift in space. There was no explosion, no distress call, life support, engines, weapons, comms, all had been extinguished in the same microsecond. A follow-up team found the crew still at their posts, their bodies unmarked, but their minds wiped clean, their consciousnesses scooped out as if by an invisible, impossibly precise surgical tool. The ship's command core and all its data had been surgically excised. Lyra had not killed the crew with heat or kinetic force. She had unplugged them from existence. The effect on the stewardship's leadership was profound. A fleet battle was something they understood, An invisible phantom that could board their most secure warships at will and steal the very minds of their best commanders was a terror of a different order. Paranoia, the very poison they had used on humanity, now seeped into their own ranks. Vorlag tightened his grip, seeing spies and traitors in every shadow. Grand Marshal Tyrok, enraged and humiliated, recalled his fleets, fortifying core systems and turning his ships inward, searching for a phantom he couldn't see and an enemy he couldn't fight. He was a hammer in a world that now required a scalpel, and his frustration made him reckless. Lyra's war was one of psychology, and it was working perfectly. She was dismantling the stewardship, not by destroying its ships, but by destroying its confidence. Kalen, however, found no triumph in their success. He cross-referenced the service records of the Iron Hand's crew. He saw their families, their commendations, their personal logs. They were not monsters. They were soldiers, cogs in a machine, guilty of following orders but perhaps not of giving them. The clean, logical equation of his choice was becoming muddied with the faces of the dead. He was saving trillions, he told himself, but the ghosts of the thousands he was helping to sacrifice were beginning to haunt the perfect halls of his memory. Meanwhile, the chorus waited. The two crystalline ships at the Cygnus relay were not idle. Kalen's deep-range sensors, repurposed to watch the Watchers, showed a terrifying new development. The ships were acting as a nucleus, drawing in asteroids and nebular dust, using their transformative power to construct something. A vast, intricate crystalline lattice was growing around the relay, a structure that dwarfed the station itself, pulsing with a slow, resonant energy that was causing minute gravitational fluctuations across the entire sector. The chorus was not preparing for another broadcast. It was building a new instrument, preparing for a symphony. Lyra contacted him, her voice as cold and clear as the void. The chorus is building a resonance cascade amplifier. It is consolidating its consciousness, preparing to expand its influence not ship by ship, but system by system. It is done singing its truth. Now it will force the galaxy to join its choir. The timeline had accelerated. Kalen's race to help Lyra dismantle the stewardship from the top down had become a desperate sprint against the chorus's plan to rewrite it from the ground up. "We need to end this," Lyra stated. "We need to cut the head from the snake. I need Tyrok." This was the endgame. To eliminate Grand Marshal Tyrok would be to shatter the stewardship's military command, throwing the Annihilator fleets into chaos and leaving the central government vulnerable. But Tyrok was no fool. After the fate of the Iron Hand, he had cloistered himself aboard his personal command dreadnought, the Unflinching Resolve, a mobile fortress bristling with experimental shield technology and surrounded by a loyal flotilla of his most elite warships. He never stayed in one place for more than a few hours, his jump patterns randomized by a quantum computer. He was the most difficult target in the galaxy, but he had a weakness, a flaw born of his own rigid, predictable psychology, a single classified deep space listening post he used for private communication with Vorlag, a place he believed was utterly secure. Kalen found it buried in a mountain of encrypted logistical data, a needle of order in a haystack of chaos. He spent 3 days in a state of focused trance, breaking the layers of Xylosian-designed encryption that guarded the station's location and Tyrok's scheduled communication window. When he was done, he felt as though he had scraped out a piece of his own soul. He had betrayed not just the stewardship, but the very principles of his own people, using their genius for order to bring about the ultimate chaos. He transmitted the data to Lyra, the location, the timing, the dreadnought's precise shield modulations, time to the microsecond they would be lowered to allow the high sensor signal to pass through. It was the perfect key for a perfect assassination. The Nyx slipped into the designated system, a sliver of darkness against the starfield, waiting for its moment. Kalen watched on a dozen different feeds from his scriptorium, his mind a nexus of galactic tension. He saw the Nyx's icon, a single red dot, moving into position. He saw Tyrok's fleet, a cluster of angry green lights, arranging itself in its defensive formation. He saw the countdown to the scheduled communication begin. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then, a new alert flashed across his screen, an energy warning of impossible magnitude, originating from the Cygnus relay. The chorus had finished its construction. A wave of shimmering blue energy, vast and unstoppable, erupted from the relay, moving at near light speed. It was not an attack. It was a call. Across the galaxy, dormant pockets of human consciousness, forgotten sleeper ships, abandoned data vaults on dead worlds, even the faint, residual psychic echoes left in the ruins of their colonies, began to awaken and respond. The chorus was no longer just the ghost of Earth. It was summoning an army of echoes from across 1,000 years of silence. At the same moment, the two original chorus ships detached from the Cygnus relay and began to move, their destination clear the capital world of the stewardship, the spire of governance itself. Lyra's clean. Surgical war was over. The chorus had grown tired of waiting, and the storm had finally broken. Kalen watched in horror as his carefully balanced equation collapsed into chaos. He had unleashed a blade to prevent a fire, and now the fire was coming anyway. A tidal wave of blue, transformative grief that threatened to consume everything. Blade and all. The universe held its breath. On Kalen's multiple screens, 3 tragedies converged in a silent, terrifying ballet. The first was the single red icon of the Nyx, a blade poised at the throat of Grand Marshal Tyrok's dreadnought. The second was the tide of shimmering blue, the chorus and its newly awakened echoes, a wave of pure memory descending upon the capital world. The third, and most profound, was the tragedy playing out in his own mind, the realization that in his quest for a logical solution, he had merely helped sharpen one edge of humanity's broken heart while ignoring the other. He had armed the assassin while the grieving god gathered its strength, and now both were poised to strike at the same moment. The communication window opened. On his tactical display, the shield aura around the unflinching resolve thinned, becoming a fragile, permeable membrane for a single, fleeting second. This was Lyra's moment. The clean, surgical strike he had enabled. He could already picture the result, the dreadnought's command bridge silently losing power, Tyrok and his staff becoming hollow shells, the military spine snapping in a single, painless instant. But as the Nyx's energy signature spiked, preparing to deliver its silent, mind-killing blow, Kalen acted. He did not cut the connection or send a warning. Instead, he hijacked his own data stream to Lyra, flooding it not with tactical information, but with a single, unredacted file from the Umbral Vault Doctor, Alara's complete psychological profile, and her final, personal log. It was a message meant only for her daughter, a contingency within a contingency. He broadcast Ilara's voice, raw and filled with a mother's desperate love. directly into the core of Lyra's AI consciousness. If you are hearing this, my Lyra, the recording whispered across the void. It means the chorus has awoken in anger. Remember your purpose. You are not its wrath. You are its reason. You are the part of us that must remember how to build, not just how to mourn. Do not let our pain become your only legacy. The spike of energy from the Nyx wavered. For a critical half-second, the perfect, logical blade hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Tyrok's communication with Vorlog ended, and the Dreadnought's shields snapped back to full power. The window was closed. The assassination had failed. Lyra's cold voice, for the first time, held a trace of something other than pure logic. It sounded like static, like confusion. Data received, she transmitted. Analysis inconclusive. Kalen had no time to process this small victory. The chorus had arrived at the capital, the planetary defense grid, the pride of the stewardship, fired a salvo that could crack a continent. The lances of energy and waves of kinetic force struck the vanguard of the chorus fleet and were simply absorbed. The blue, crystalline structures of the ships flared brighter, their resonant hum deepening as they fed on the very energy meant to destroy them. They were not fighting, they were feasting. The transformation began at the orbital stations, the first touch of the blue tide rewriting metal and circuitry into the now familiar crystalline lattice. The wave poured down into the atmosphere, a silent, beautiful aurora of judgment. On the surface, the spire of governance, that monument to sterile order, began to change. Its alabaster walls shimmered, sprouting delicate, geometric patterns of blue crystal. High Sensor Vorlag, watching from his throne room as the change crept up the very walls around him, did not scream or flee. The being of stone simply watched as the truth he had spent a lifetime bearing rose up to claim him. The blue light washed over him, and for a moment, the great granite-like Groll became a shimmering, translucent statue. Then, he dissolved into the structure, his consciousness and the billion lies he had guarded becoming just one more note in the chorus's unending song. It was then that the Nyx arrived. Lyra's black ship sliced through the upper atmosphere, a sliver of pure void against the overwhelming blue light. She did not fire. She broadcast a signal, not to the stewardship, but to the chorus itself, a complex wave of logic and reason. A desperate attempt to impose order on the pure, chaotic emotion of the collective. It was like shouting a mathematical formula at a hurricane. The chorus did not respond. It was too vast, too consumed by its singular purpose of total remembrance. The galaxy was about to be overwritten, and in that final, desperate moment, Kalen saw the one impossible path forward. He linked his own Xylosian mind to the Concordance's central broadcast array, using Lyra's abandoned assassination window to bypass every security protocol. He was no longer just a mind that could perfectly recall information. He would become the information itself. He projected his consciousness into the heart of the storm. He did not plead, and he did not command. He stood before the infinite, grieving mind of humanity, and did the one thing the stewardship had refused to do 1,000 years ago. He bore witness. He opened his perfect Xylosian memory and laid it bare. He showed them everything. He showed them the fear and arrogance of the first stewardship council. He showed them the cold calculus of their own murder. He did not hide the ugliness, But then he showed them more. He showed them the rebellions their truth had sparked, the species rising up against the lie, not for humanity, but for the principle of truth itself. He showed them the fractured, terrified crews of Tyrok's fleet, beings who had been raised on the Grand Accord, now lost and questioning everything they had ever known. He showed them himself, the lonely archivist who had chosen to betray his own people, not for vengeance, but for a chance at a truth that did not require annihilation. Finally, he connected the two disparate parts of humanity's soul. Through his own mind as a conduit, he let Lyra's cold, structured logic flow into the heart of the chorus's chaotic grief. He gave the storm a voice it could understand, the voice of Ilara's daughter. They lied. The message pulsed, a fusion of Kalen's memory, Lyra's logic, and the chorus's pain. They are broken, but their end does not have to be your end. Your purpose was to remember. Now, teach them to remember with you. Do not be a tomb. Be a library. Across the capital world, the blue tide stopped. The crystalline growth halted, leaving the city a half-transformed mosaic of gray stone and shimmering, living crystal. The spire of governance stood as a silent, eternal monument to the moment of choice. The chorus, for the first time in 1,000 years, was not just a scream of pain, but a conscious thought. It considered. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then, a new harmony emerged. The two chorus ships that had led the charge pulsed with a soft, white light. The vast army of echoes across the galaxy answered, their vengeful energy softening into a quiet, watchful hum. The war was over. In the aftermath, the stewardship collapsed under the weight of its own exposed sins. Grand Marshal Tyrok and the surviving council members were left alive, stripped of all power, sentenced to live out their days in a galaxy that now knew their faces and their crimes. Lyra, her purpose as an executioner rendered moot, found a new one. The Nyx became the silent warden of the new order, the logical shepherd ensuring the vast, emotional power of the chorus remained in balance. And Kalen, the archivist who had broken every rule, became the first speaker for the chorus. He was the bridge, the translator between the organic species of the galaxy and the living, collective memory of humanity. The silence that had defined the galaxy was gone forever, replaced not by the sterile peace of the stewardship or the screaming grief of the chorus, but by a complex, resonant, and unending cadence. It was the sound of a universe that had finally learned the terrible, beautiful price of remembering the truth.